and he ended up being in ICU for 6 weeks. And at that time, or by that time, my oldest had started kindergarten, and I would drop my oldest off at kindergarten. I would drive to Atlanta, and I told the nurses, I only have X amount of time, and they would let me come in anytime I arrived and to see Nick and stay, and I could stay a couple of hours. And then I would drive home, and I would be there in time to pick up my kindergartner for school. I dropped him off in the morning and then was there to pick him up. So that went on for 3 weeks.
Welcome to Imperfect Momming. Our children are constantly looking to us for examples. The term role model doesn't quite cut it here. We are shaping their worldview with every move we make. You see, it's not in the lectures we give or moments where we're actively attempting to teach them. It's in the micro movements we make, the unconscious ways in which we navigate life. We are constantly teaching our children how to show up for themselves, their friends, their future partners, and even their future children. So what can we do to ensure we are raising thoughtful, compassionate, self-aware human beings? We have to become them ourselves. No one is perfect, but we can all still be better, and it starts with self-healing. Let's get to it. Welcome back to Imperfect Momming, and I have a very special guest today, Susan May. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I'm a mother of 4 children, 4 grown children. And in fact, the oldest one has a birthday tomorrow, and he's in his early 40s. And he cringed when I said that, I know. And then one that is 38, 37, and 35, that will soon be 36. And I'm also a writer. I write nonfiction books as well as writing fiction romance under the name of Susan Carlisle. And I have almost 50 books out in the world. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I think. I said, whoa, how did that happen? But
if you're not watching the podcast, my face, it just says it all. 50 books, my goodness.
Yeah. So I hope that I will reach 50 this year and no later than next year. So, but I'm proud of what I've written and done. And I live in North Georgia, and I enjoy my family and my 8 grandchildren, and I love to travel and love castles and afternoon tea. So that's a little bit about me.
That's fun. I've been to Georgia a couple of times. That was the first place I flew to all by myself at the ripe old age of 13, going through the what is Atlanta airport by myself. Yeah. Good thing I was adventurous.
Yeah. And I tell you what, people that are way older than 13 think they're being adventurous to go to the Atlanta airport. But I remember going well before the Olympics, which it looks like what they did for the Olympics now. But this is when the tall basketball players would come through wearing a bright yellow or orange leisure suit. And I was a little girl and just looking as they went by. You could see any kind of mankind in the Atlanta airport. That's for sure.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. It's such a huge hub.
Oh, yeah. Largest in the world, busiest in the world. Yeah.
That's what I thought. I was like, it's the largest in the world, I think. But so you had a story to share about being a mom of one of your 4 kids.
Yes, my youngest son was born with a bad heart. Not just a sort of bad heart, the most extreme bad heart that you can have. We did not know that he was going to have any kind of problem. And he this is before they did ultrasounds, and now they would most likely find there is a problem, but back 35 years ago they didn't do that. And we were a young family with 3 young children, and we didn't pay. It was to pay extra if you wanted an ultrasound, so we didn't, and we didn't care what he was going to be, so we didn't do it. But he was born, and the doctor told me that there was a problem, and it turned out that he had the 2 upper chambers of his heart, but only one of the lower chambers of his heart. And thankfully, he got a strong left ventricle, which is the main pumping part of your heart. But he also had transposition of the great vessels, which is your aorta that comes out of the top of your heart, and your pulmonary arteries, which go to your lungs. Those were swapped, which meant he got almost all of his blood flow to his lungs and almost none to his hands and his feet. So they were a bluish color, and he had difficulty breathing. And then he also had a septal defect, which is the vessel that it controls the amount of blood going to the next chamber of the heart, and that wasn't working correctly. So he had all 4 of those, and without and not having a chamber. So any one of those 4 are considered a heart birth defect alone, but all 4 of them together is serious business, or more serious business. So he was taken to the regional hospital, the Children's Hospital in Atlanta, by ambulance, and my husband went with him, which meant the same thing as no knowledge on my part, because I want to know the facial expression of the doctors and the nurses, and he's just going, yeah, they said he'd be fine, those kind of things. But they didn't say he would be fine. He had to, my husband made the decision that he would have heart surgery, and Andy made the right decision. And when he was 5 days old, he had his first heart surgery. Our heart is about the size of our fist. So think of a 5-day-old that's about the size of a walnut. So we're talking about thread-sized vessels. So Nick had his first surgery. Now, Nick was the youngest of the 4, and my oldest one had just turned 5 2 weeks earlier. So we had a lot of little children under, the age of 5, and we were already, in general, a busy house. But then to have one, that needed to have heart surgery. So Nick had the heart surgery, and he had to go to ICU, and he recovered well and got out of the hospital in 2 weeks, which was amazing for that type of surgery. And he came home, and I did most of the nursing care, but I had to put a tube in his nose and feed him, and which I thought, this is going to be high tech. It amounted to a large syringe taped to the top of the baby bed. You pour the food in it, and it, gravity takes it into his belly. But I had to learn to put a NG tube in before Nick could leave the hospital. And I have a political science degree. I hadn't done nursing, but I'm a darn good cardiac nurse now. But yeah, you do what you have to for your children. But we spent a good deal of time driving up and down the road to Atlanta, which is about an hour away. Well, then we lived even further than I do now, so it was about closer to an hour and a half. But when Nick was 3 months old, he had to go in for another heart surgery, and they found out that the one of his pulmonaries was not large enough. So he went in for surgery, and he was almost lost him on the OR table, but he survived, and but the nerve to his diaphragm was nicked. Your diaphragm is what pushes your lungs up and pushes air out. And he ended up being in ICU for 6 weeks. And at that time, or by that time, my oldest had started kindergarten. And I would drop my oldest off at kindergarten. I would drive to Atlanta, and I told the nurses, I only have X amount of time, and they would let me come in anytime I arrived and to see Nick and stay. And I could stay a couple of hours. And then I would drive home, and I would be there in time to pick up my kindergartner for school. I dropped him off in the morning and then was there to pick him up. So that went on for 3 weeks. But I felt like Nick or the oldest needed his mama there, when he was starting school and all. So I did what I could, driving back and forth. And I couldn't have done that if it hadn't been for my mama helping me. And my husband was working, but, he was supportive during that time. So it took a long time for Nick to come home after that. And because he had been, everything had been done for him. I mean, literally eating and drinking and moving. He had a lot to recover from. And we spent time with, relearning to eat and trying to catch up. That it turned out, there was 5 months there that we had to work at things. And but he did real well. And one of the major problems was eating. So he came home on a pump that fed him through that NG tube all night long. And I would get up at 2 a.m. and change the bag of food. And it would just, be a little drop at a time. And it took him weeks and weeks before he could eat by bottle. And I was only allowed to feed him for 20 minutes at a time with a bottle. A bottle and breastfeeding requires a lot of energy on a baby's part. So, which burns up calories. So, it's kind of a win some, lose some on that. But we finally got to where he could take enough by bottle. But, and he grew and caught up or at least enough to be encouraging. And so when he was about a year old, we went back in to see the doctor, which we made monthly visits anyway. And this time they said he needed another surgery, that the other pulmonary was too small. So with great trepidation on my part, I said, okay, we can do surgery, but he's having a first birthday party, and he had a lavish first birthday party, and his doctors and nurses were invited and came, and friends and family, but he had to have, there were some things normal we had to do, and that was the one that I held the line to. So after he turned 1, he went in for the other surgery. And this time Dr. Canner, who has done all of his heart surgeries, turned him over on his side and was going through his side in the hopes that he wouldn't have to put Nick on a heart-lung machine and stop his heart. So when he did that, Nick did not adjust well to that, and they almost lost him again. This time they flipped him over and opened his chest through the center, which had already been opened twice. And so he was returned to me with an incision down the front and an incision on the side. So you kind of had to hold his butt and, wheel and deal not to hurt him. But he managed to get out of the hospital and did really well. And he grew and, learned to walk and talk and was, very much part of the family and, sit in a high chair at the table and that sort of stuff. So he was really, he was really amazing in that aspect. But then when he, just before he turned 2, Dr. Kenner said, how do you feel about a heart transplant? It was time. By that time, instead of we were told this was a stage surgery anyway, which meant that he would have a couple of surgeries. And then when he got just over 2, he would have another one that would fix him for the rest of his life, because children grow so much between birth and 2 years old. So it was time to start talking about the next stage. Well, by this time they were doing it instead of 2 stages, they were doing it in 3 stages. So we started talking about the next stage, and he asked me, he said, well, how do you feel about a heart transplant? And I thought, well, I had seen children with heart transplants. I had seen adults with heart transplants, and I knew some of them did very well. So I told him, I said, well, those are really nice things if you need one. Are you sure we're going to need one here? Because my husband and I had always thought of a heart transplant is being on the back burner as a backup plan, and not at 1 year or 1 or almost 2 years old. So we went down, my husband and I, Nick, went down to the hospital and talked to Nick's cardiologist and Dr. Canner, the surgeon, and debated, which way should we go and what should we do. Well, you've got to have amount of antibodies in your blood, because if your antibodies are high, it'll fight off a donated organ. So Nick had to have an antibodies test and had to have an AIDS test. And he'd had blood transfusions quite a number of times, and not always with blood that we could, collect or have. So, but Dr. Kenner called on a Saturday morning. And no, it was a Saturday afternoon, because it wasn't fast enough for me. And I told him, I said, what have you been doing all day? I've been waiting on you to call, He said, well, I had to do a transplant over at Emory. And then now I'm over here seeing a child at Children's or whatever. And okay, you win, you had a good excuse. But I said, so what do you think we ought, or what did the test show? And it showed that Nick had no antibodies, and which was amazing in itself. And I asked him, I said, well, what do you think we should do? And he said, I think you need to transplant. And I told my husband, and my husband said, so y'all made a decision without me. I said, well, I didn't realize that, but yeah, I guess we did, or I did. And I said, you made the first one, I'm making the second one. But so Nick was listed 8 weeks before he turned 2 on the United Network for Organ Sharing List, which is a list of people who need transplants, and it's in the computers in Richmond, Virginia. And from there, he waited. We had one false call. Dr. Canner called and said, excuse me. He said, come on down, that there's a possibility of a heart but that you, but it may not work because of, we don't know, even up until the time a transplant patient is on the table, even their chest open, ready for transplant. If something goes wrong with the donor or goes wrong with the what they call an ischemic time, the time that the organ's out of the body, or anything like that, then they'll call the transplant off. Everything has to be perfect. So I said, okay. And the house was an uproar. My mama was coming to see about the other kids, and she didn't make it in time, or trying to hurry. And we were not organized for that part of the adventure. But, and it turned out he called back and said, the heart's not good enough. He wasn't accepting. And I'm thinking, my kid needs a heart transplant and you're turning hearts down. That's not, gather them up, And so another couple of weeks went by. He called again, and we were all outside, and Nick had just had a bowl of popcorn, which is a semi no-no, but he liked popcorn. And he was dirty. He'd been playing in the dirt. And Dr. Cantor said, well, we've got the possibility of a heart, and, I'll call you back. I said, well, I'm outside planting some flowers that have got to go in the ground. If I don't, I said, I'm going to go work. And if I don't hear, and this is the days before you carried, a little phone with you in your pocket.
Hmm.
And I told him, I said, I'll call you back if I hadn't heard from you in 20 minutes or whatever. He said, well, you just go do whatever you think you need to do. I don't think I was his regular parent, so to speak, but I came in, and Nick and I got a shower after I got the flowers in the ground. And Dr. Cantor called back and said, come on down. We think this is the one we need. And it was, I did. And he told me, he said, nah, don't speed. And I said, well, I don't ever speed. He said, yeah, I bet. But, and naturally, that's the one time we didn't see a state patrolman or anything, but we went. It was in the afternoon, and Nick that evening at 12:01, he received his new heart, and many things have happened since then, but that's almost 34 years ago. In April, it'll be 34 years. And he is, I think he's the third or fourth longest living a person of any age with a heart transplant. And he is the second, actually, I think he's the youngest with a heart, still with a heart transplant. So, and kind of to cut to the chase, he has a wife and a little girl who is 6, who is precious, and they live nearby. And he's had some ups and downs, and I can share some of that with you. But he's been a blessing, and he takes care of himself. And most people can't believe that he's had a heart transplant in general, much less for that length of time. So, but
what an incredible story! Because I mean, can't say that I know much about heart transplants, but on House, they like 10 years ago, they said that heart transplants last about 10 years. So that's really incredible. And I would love to, ask more questions, but we're running out of time for the course of the podcast. But I do want to ask you if there's a piece of advice that you want to share with moms.
Love your kid. That's your job. that's what they are. You know, so many people think, well, I've got to educate them. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And the only thing that we're admonished to do is to love your kid and love them unconditionally, and no matter what. And I was, my husband and I were determined we were going to keep our kid, and we wanted our kid. But before we have to go, this is the first book I've written, or I wrote, and it's called Nick's New Heart, 30 years and counting. And this is up until I did this for his 25th, for his 30th anniversary of his heart. So it's 3 years old, but up until that time. But it has pictures, and it has our family life, and it's not just about Nick. It's about a family who had a sixth kid and was determined that we're going to be a family. And so anyway, but it's Nick's New Heart, 30 years and counting. I need to add to it, but I told him the last time, I said, boy, I'm not going too rough emotionally, for me. Because since then, I will add, since then, he's had to have a new aorta. He has had cancer that was caused by being a transplant patient. And last year he did. And he's got this big bushy head of hair now. He said after he lost his hair, he wasn't going to cut it. And he looks like he's about 18 and a part of a convent or whatever. So, but he's really fortunate. His sister says that if there's an atomic bomb, it'll be Nick and the cockroaches.
That's funny. It sounds like it. It sounds like he's a survivor for sure.
Yeah.
And where can our listeners find you?
They can find me at susancmay.com. And all of my nonfiction books are on that website. And if you're interested in medical romances, then you can find me at susancarlisle.com. And all my books are there. And naturally, everything is on Amazon. What would we be if we weren't for Amazon? Yeah.
Well, I love that. Thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. And hopefully any moms out there that are struggling with sick kiddo, I can think of one in just the back of my mind, might be able to reach out to you and ask for, some mindset advice, because it sounds like you guys did really well.
Well, anytime, and I'm glad to help. There were times when you'd think, ooh, and I wouldn't let myself think the wrong thing, because that's not beneficial to anybody. So, but I love talking to people and sharing Nick's story, and I can listen as good as I talk.
All right. Well, thank you again. And yes, and we will have another episode of Imperfect Momming for you all coming next week. And until we meet again, keep healing. Bye, guys.
Thank you for tuning in to Imperfect Momming. It's time for us to step up and realize that our power is not in trying to shape our children. Our power lies in shaping ourselves into the people we want our children to model themselves after. Don't just do it for your kids. Do it for yourself. When you become a more self-aware, compassionate, and confident person, you and everyone around you benefit. For more information about me and my work, visit AliciaLyons.com. That's ALYSIALYONS.com. And until we meet again, keep healing.